Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku defended Earth as the last Avenger in Secret Wars. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was not ending in fire and fury, as the old stories foretold. There was no grand explosion, no final, cataclysmic war against an ultimate evil. It was ending in silence. A sterile, absolute silence that was more terrifying than any scream. It was ending in the color of nothing. A creeping, omnivorous white was bleeding in from the edges of reality. It didn't burn or freeze, it simply unmade. Buildings, people, the very sky above Mizudafu, they weren't destroyed, they were erased, their existence relegated to a memory that was itself fading. In the epicenter of what was left of their world, Class 1A fought a battle they could not comprehend. It's gaining on us. Roundface, get them higher. Katsuki Bakugo's voice, usually a roar of furious confidence, was strained, cracking with a desperation he would never admit to. His palms sizzled with explosions, not aimed at an enemy, but propelled downwards, trying to give Uravity the extra thrust she needed to lift a chunk of fractured asphalt carrying the last group of civilians. I'm trying, Katsuki. Achiko Uraraka grunted, her face pale, fingertips pressed together. The strain of keeping a city block's worth of rubble and 100 souls afloat was making her physically ill. Below her, the white void licked at the edges of her makeshift life raft. A street lamp on the corner simply ceased to be. Izuku Midoriya, his green and black costume torn and stained, was a whirlwind of emerald lightning at the edge of the abyss. One for All thrummed under his skin, a symphony of 8 voices screaming a single, unified command: push it back. He was using 45%, the absolute limit his body could sustain without shattering, but it was like punching the ocean. His fists, wreathed in the crackling energy of a sun, met the white wall and found no purchase. There was no impact, no resistance. The energy was simply absorbed. Swallowed. Gone. It's not working, he yelled, his voice raw. He could feel the vestiges within him, a frantic council of ghosts. It's not a physical force. The second user's voice rasped in his mind, sharp and tactical. It's an absence of force. An absence of everything. Focus, Ninth, Nana Shimura urged, her tone a fragile anchor in the storm. Look for a weakness. An anchor. Something to hold on to, he tried. Black Whip lashed out, thick tendrils of dark energy seeking purchase, only to dissolve into the nothingness like smoke. He used float to rise higher, searching for a pattern, an epicenter, anything his analytical mind could latch onto. But there was nothing. Just the end. He saw Ada, his engine sputtering, ferrying the last of the wounded heroes to Uraraka's floating island. He saw Todoroki, erecting massive walls of ice, not as a barrier, but as a desperate delay tactic. Each crystalline wall would stand for a second, a monument to their defiance, before the white void consumed it without a sound. And then he saw him. Tashinori Yagi. All Might. He was in his skeletal form, standing on a precipice of crumbling road, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. He wasn't fighting. He knew he couldn't. He was just standing there, a defiant scarecrow against the apocalypse, his fist raised. His smile, that iconic, world-saving smile, was still on his face, though it was now a fragile, heartbreaking thing. He was being the symbol of peace one last time, a beacon for a world that had only minutes left to exist. Their eyes met across the chaos. A universe of pride, sorrow, and final farewells passed between them. You did good, my boy. All Might. Deku screamed, a primal sound of terror and loss. He launched himself forward, FA genes storing and releasing kinetic energy in a catastrophic burst. He had to get to him. He had to save him. He was too slow. The white reached the edge of the road. Tashinori Yagi did not scream. He did not flinch. He simply met the end with the same courage he had lived his life, and then he was gone. The smile, the man, the symbol, erased. A part of Izuku broke. The symphony in his soul became a single, keening shriek of pure grief. The world narrowed to the advancing wall of white and the face of his mentor, now only a memory. DKU, Bakugo's shout snapped him back. He turned just in time to see the creeping edge of oblivion touch Uraraka's island. The civilians, their faces masks of silent terror, vanished in an instant. Ida, who had just landed, was halfway consumed, his armor dissolving like sugar in water. Izuku! Uraraka whispered, her hand reaching for him, her quirk failing as her body was unmade. Her brown eyes, wide with fear but also an unwavering trust in him, were the last thing he saw of her. Then she, too, was gone. No! Bakugo roared, a sound of pure, animalistic rage. He turned, not running, but blasting himself directly towards the void. His eyes, burning crimson, were locked on Izuku. There was no taunt, no rivalry, only a final, desperate command. Live, you damn nerd! A final, starburst explosion, brighter than any he had ever created, lit up the dying world for a fraction of a second. It was a pointless, magnificent act of defiance. And then, he too was swallowed by the color of nothing. Izuku Midoriya was alone. The last living thing in a dead universe. The white was coming for him now, swift and inexorable. He had failed. He, the ninth user of One for All, the inheritor of the sacred torch, had failed to save a single person. The weight of his failure was a physical thing, heavier than any mountain, crushing him from the inside out. The power within him, a gift meant to save, felt like a cruel joke. He closed his eyes, tears carving hot tracks through the grime on his face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, everyone. He braced for non-existence. But it didn't come. Instead, he felt a pull. A sharp, violent hook that latched onto the very core of his being, onto One for All. It was a sensation of impossible energy, golden and intricate, like a net woven from pure mathematics and magic. It ignored his body, his grief, his reality. It was focused solely on the supernova of power that was OFA. From a place beyond time and space, on a life raft built from desperation, Dr. Stephen Strange cast his final, hopeless spell. It was a contingency, a cosmic lifeboat protocol, designed to seek out and retrieve the most significant sources of living energy from dying realities as the incursions reached their peak. He had aimed it at Earth 616, hoping to snag a god, a cosmic entity, a powerhouse like the Sentry or Thor. The spell, however, found something else. It detected a power signature unlike any it had ever encountered. Not magic, not cosmic, but a biological singularity, a stockpile of life force and energy that had been cultivated and grown for generations, condensed into a single vessel. To the arcane senses of the spell, Izuku Midoriya registered as a small, walking star. A prime target. For Izuku, the world tore open, a circle of searing gold light, filled with mandalas and spinning geometric shapes, erupted in front of him. The pull became an irresistible yank. The white void, mere inches from his skin, recoiled as if burned by the golden energy. He was dragged through the portal, his body screaming in protest as it was stretched and compressed across dimensions he was never meant to witness. He saw glimpses of 1,000 other dying worlds, heard the psychic screams of trillions of souls, and then, with a final, gut-wrenching lurch, he was spat out the other side. He landed hard, tumbling across rough, metallic ground that scraped his costume and skin raw. The portal snapped shut behind him with a sound like a breaking bell jar, plunging him back into silence. But this was a different kind of silence. It was filled with the low hum of machinery, the distant drip of water, and the whisper of a strange wind. He retched, his body trying to expel a sickness that was more existential than physical. He pushed himself onto his hands and knees, chest heaving. His head pounded, the ghosts of the vestiges groaning in his mind, disoriented and weak. When he could finally lift his head, the grief he had held at bay came crashing down. They were gone. All of them. His friends, his mother, all might, gone. A dry, ragged sob tore from his throat, but no tears came. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean by loss. He was alive. And he hated it. He was the survivor, the one left behind to carry the weight of a dead universe. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash in his mouth. Slowly, painfully, he forced himself to his feet. His hero training, ingrained into his very marrow, took over. Assessed the situation. Analyzed the environment. Survive. He was in some kind of sprawling, industrial alleyway. Pipes, thick as his body, ran up the sides of towering, grime-blackened buildings that seemed to claw at the sky, blocking out any natural light. A steady, foul-smelling drizzle fell, sizzling on the hot metal grates under his feet. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, rust, and something acrid he couldn't identify. Neon signs, written in a language that was a jarring mix of English, Cyrillic, and characters he had never seen before, cast the alley in a sickly collage of red and blue light. The signs flickered, advertising things like synth sustenance and chronomechanics. But it was the sky that truly stole his breath. Looking up past the oppressive architecture, he saw a sky that was fundamentally wrong. There were no familiar constellations, no moon. Instead, a tapestry of alien stars, nebulae of impossible colors, and the shattered rings of some long-dead planet littered the darkness. And dominating it all, hanging in the sky like a malevolent god, was a colossal, glowing effigy. It was a man in green robes and a terrifying metal mask, his arms crossed in a pose of absolute authority. The image was static, unmoving, yet Izuku felt as if it were staring directly at him, into the core of his soul. Where am I? The question was a whisper. Was this the afterlife? A punishment? A nightmare born of his grief? The vestiges were stirring, their voices faint whispers. The laws of physics feel pliable, the third user noted, his voice a low hum. As if held in place by a will, not by nature. Danger, the fourth user, Haiku Shinomori, stated simply. His quirk, danger sense, was a low, constant thrum at the base of Izuku's skull, not spiking, but omnipresent. The entire world was a threat. He needed answers. He needed to find someone. Anyone. He stumbled out of the alleyway, his movements stiff and clumsy. He emerged onto a wider street, and the sheer scale of the place hit him. It was a city, but a Frankenstein's monster of a city. Architecture from a dozen different styles and eras clashed violently. Hover vehicles zipped through the air on designated lanes, weaving between Gothic spires and chromed skyscrapers. People hurried along the rain-slicked sidewalks, their faces hidden by hoods or cybernetic implants. They were a diverse, strange crowd, humans, blue-skinned Kree, hulking insectoids, all walking the same streets, their expressions uniformly sullen and weary. Towering over everything were holographic billboards, all displaying the same masked face from the sky. The messages, in that same hybrid language, were simple and brutal. Doom is all. Order is law. Heresy is death. Izuku's mind, a supercomputer of analysis and observation even when fractured by trauma, began to piece things together. The portal. The strange mix of people and technology. This wasn't another planet. This was patchwork. A place made of pieces of other places. And it was ruled by this doom. His hero instincts screamed at him. This place was wrong. It was a world built on fear. He could feel it in the way people averted their eyes, in the tense set of their shoulders. This was a peace born of oppression, the kind of order Endeavor had once tried to enforce, magnified 1,000-fold. As he stood there, a lost boy in a nightmare city, a commotion erupted down the street. Shouts, followed by the crackle of energy. Izuku's head snapped towards the sound. Muscle memory took over. He darted into the shadows, his movements fluid and silent, and crept closer. He saw them. Two figures, tall and imposing, clad in gleaming armor that seemed to merge medieval design with advanced technology. They each held a massive hammer that pulsed with electric blue light. Their helmets were fashioned after ancient Norse designs, but their faces were grim and human. On their chests was the same symbol as the billboards, the stylized, stoic mask of doom. They had a man cornered against a wall. He was thin, dressed in rags, and clutching a small, metallic box. "Please," the man begged, his voice trembling. "It's just medicine. My daughter, she has the tech plague." The first armored figure, a woman with a stern face and braided blonde hair, pointed her hammer at him. The weapon hummed with power. "The distribution of unregistered medical supplies is a Class 3 heresy, citizen. All provisions are allocated by the will of God Emperor Doom. Your hoarding is a sin against order, but the sanctioned clinics are empty. It takes weeks." The man pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "She doesn't have weeks. The will of Doom is absolute," the second enforcer, a burly, bearded man, boomed. His voice was amplified, metallic. Your sentiment is irrelevant. Surrender the contraband and accept your judgment. Izuku watched from the darkness, his heart pounding. The injustice of it was a physical blow. This wasn't heroism. This wasn't keeping the peace. This was bullying. This was tyranny. He saw the man's desperation, the cold, dogmatic cruelty of the enforcers. In that moment, the man wasn't a stranger from an alien world. He was every civilian Izuku had ever sworn to protect. His grief was still a raw, gaping wound in his chest, but something else was stirring within it, a spark of righteous fury. The core of his being, the very essence of what made him Deku, refused to let this happen. Save him. The thought was not his own, but a chorus from the vestiges. It was a reaffirmation of his purpose. The bearded enforcer raised his hammer. Final warning. Compliance or purgation. The man clutched the box tighter, shielding it with his body. No, the hammer began to glow brighter, lightning arcing across its surface. Izuku moved. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He exploded from the shadows. The vestiges, sensing his resolve, roared to life. He activated One for All at 20%, a manageable output that wouldn't shatter his already aching bones. Green lightning erupted around him. To the enforcers, it was as if a ghost had materialized from the rain. One moment, they were delivering Doom's judgment. The next, a blur of green and black was upon them. Black whip shot from his arm, not as a single whip, but as a dozen writhing tendrils. Before the bearded enforcer could even register the threat, the tendrils had wrapped around his hammer, his wrist, and his ankle. With a sharp tug, Izuku simultaneously ripped the weapon from his grasp and pulled his feet out from under him. The armored giant crashed to the ground with a deafening clang. The woman spun around, her eyes wide with shock, raising her own hammer. Izuku was already in motion. He used the momentum from the throw, pushing off the wall and using FA gene to convert the stored kinetic energy into a burst of speed. He appeared in front of her in a heartbeat. She swung her hammer in a horizontal arc, a wave of electrical energy tearing through the air. Izuku dropped, sliding under the attack. The energy crackled over his head, singing the tips of his hair. As he came up, he slammed his palm against the ground, channeling a flicker of One for All into it. The pavement buckled, throwing the female enforcer off balance. It was all the opening he needed. He sprang to his feet, his fist clenched. He didn't aim for her head or chest. He aimed for the hammer. Delaware smash! He yelled, the words of familiar comfort in this insane world. He flicked his fingers, sending a compressed blast of air pressure forward. It wasn't a destructive, 100% blast, but a precise, targeted shockwave. The force struck the hammer dead on, sending a violent shudder up the woman's arm and forcing her to drop it. It clattered to the ground, its blue light flickering out. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds. Silence descended once more, broken only by the hiss of the rain and the groaning of the downed enforcer. Izuku stood over them, chest heaving, his right arm throbbing with a familiar, deep ache. Even at 20%, the repeated strain was taking its toll. He turned to the civilian, who was staring at him with a mixture of terror and awe. Go, Izuku said, his voice rough. Get out of here. Now. The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his medicine box like a holy relic. Thank you, he stammered. But, who are you? You just attacked the Thor core. You've defied God Emperor Doom. The name hit Izuku like a physical blow. God Emperor Doom. So this man wasn't just a ruler. He had set himself up as a god. And these enforcers, the Thor core. It clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. This world wasn't just oppressed, it was a cult on a planetary scale. Before Izuku could reply, alarms began to blare across the city, their wail high and piercing. Red lights flashed from unseen sources, painting the streets in blood. He'll kill you for this, the man whispered, before turning and vanishing into the labyrinthine alleys. Izuku was alone again, this time with the full attention of a hostile world bearing down on him. The female Thor was stirring, reaching for a communicator on her belt. He had to run. He scooped up one of the discarded hammers. It was surprisingly heavy, cold and inert in his hand. A trophy? A weapon? He didn't know. He just knew he couldn't leave it here. With a final look at the towering, judgmental effigy in the sky, he turned and fled into the darkness. His body ached. His arm felt like it was fractured. Grief was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He was being hunted in a world he didn't understand, a world forged from the ashes of dead realities. He was an anomaly. A ghost from a world that no longer existed. He had failed to save his home. But as he ran, the feel of the rain on his face, the throb in his arm, and the panicked, grateful eyes of the man he just saved echoed in his mind. He had failed his world, yes, but his mission, the core directive that had been passed down from hero to hero, remained. He had saved one person, and in this new, terrifying hell, that had to be enough to start. He was no longer the symbol of peace in training. He didn't know what he was, but as the name of this world's God-King echoed in his ears, Doom, 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 Izuku Midoriya knew one thing for certain: he was a hero. And his watch was not over. The city was a cage of neon and steel, and Izuku Midoriya was the rat in its walls. For 3 rotations, he couldn't call them days, not under this perpetually twilight sky, he had been running. The blaring alarms from his first, reckless act of heroism had become the soundtrack to his new life. The Thor Corps, as he now knew them, were relentless. He learned their methods through frantic observation. They moved in patrols of 2 or 3, their heavy, armored footfalls echoing a block away. They carried scanners that hummed in the rain, devices that seemed to hunt for energy signatures. His own one for all, even when dormant, must have glowed like a beacon to their senses. Survival meant suppression. It meant becoming a ghost. He found his greatest ally in the quirk of the 6th user, and smokescreen was no longer just a tool for misdirection in a fight. It was his habitat. He would release dense clouds of it in claustrophobic alleys, the vapor clinging to the perpetual dampness, blinding his pursuers and muffling their scanners. While they stumbled through the gray, he would be scaling the walls, his fingers and toes finding purchase on pipes and ledges, using float to lighten his weight for silent, impossible leaps across rooftops. He was a phantom. A whisper of green lightning glimpsed in the corner of an eye. A sudden, inexplicable system glitch in a patrol's scanner. A footprint in the grime that vanished around the corner. During the brief moments of respite, huddled in the guts of some forgotten maintenance shaft or perched precariously on a gargoyle overlooking the city's ceaseless, miserable flow, he would learn. He listened to conversations on the streets below, his hearing enhanced by One for All. He watched the holographic news feeds that played on a loop, all featuring the stoic, terrifying visage of God Emperor Doom. The law was simple. The law was absolute. Doom was God. The creator of their world, the architect of their salvation from the nothingness that came before. His will was reality. To question it was heresy. The Thor Corps were his voice and his hammer, the arbiters of his divine justice. The barons were his feudal lords, granted dominion over the patchwork territories of this planet, battle world, the broadcasts called it, in exchange for absolute fealty. It was a world meticulously crafted, held together by a single, egomaniacal will. And in this world, an act of selfless heroism was the greatest crime of all. You cannot keep this up. 9th, the voice of the 2nd user, sharp and pragmatic as ever, cut through his thoughts. Izuku was crammed into a ventilation duct, the metallic tang of the air thick in his lungs. Below, a Thor patrol passed, their boots clanging a rhythm of authority. He's right, the 3rd user added, his voice a low rumble. This city, Technopolis, is too ordered. Too controlled. Every street is a kill box. You need ground where their technology is a hindrance, not a help. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, the phantom ache of grief a constant companion. The voices of the vestiges were his only link to a home that was less than a memory. They were his mentors, his tactical advisors, his only family. Where do I go? Izuku projected his thoughts into the shimmering, internal space of One for All. Nana Shimura's presence was a comforting warmth against the cold fear. You're doing what you have to do to survive, Izuku. Don't you ever forget that you are more than just a survivor. But they are right. You need a place to think. A place to heal. It was Yoichi Shigaraki, the 1st user, whose insight cut the deepest. His voice was faint, a fragile thread of light in the darkness. This place, its rules are not the rules of our universe. I can feel it. The very fabric of reality is thin. It bends not to physics, but to belief. To the will of this doom. Your power, ninth, is anathema to that. It is not the will of one, but the compounded hope and will of many. It is a fundamental contradiction to the law of this world. That is why they fear you. That is why they hunt you, a contradiction. An anomaly. That's what he was. He had no place here, no history, no future. Just a power that screamed defiance in a world built on submission. Following the third user's advice, Izuku began to move towards the city's edge. It took another full rotation, a desperate game of cat and mouse through industrial zones and decaying slums where doom's light shone less brightly. He stowed away on a massive, rust bucket of a cargo hauler, burying himself amongst crates of what smelled like processed nutritional paste. The vehicle rumbled for hours, crossing an invisible border that made the air shimmer. When the hauler finally stopped and the doors hissed open, the change was so abrupt it was dizzying. The oppressive weight of Technopolis was gone. The air was no longer metallic and acrid, but thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth, and the perfume of strange, oversized flora. He had traded a cage of steel for one of wood and vine. He had arrived in the Greenland domain. It was a prehistoric nightmare landscape, a savage garden of impossible proportions. Towering, fern-like trees formed a canopy so dense that the strange starlight of Battleworld barely pierced it, leaving the jungle floor in a perpetual, humid gloom. The sounds of the city were replaced by the buzz of insects the size of his fist and the distant, earth-shaking roars of creatures he had only ever seen in textbooks. For the first time since his arrival, his danger sense, which had been a constant, low-grade headache in Technopolis, finally settled into a more natural rhythm. It would spike, a sharp lance behind his eyes, as a pack of raptor-like creatures with iridescent feathers stalked through the undergrowth, or when a behemoth with a long neck and a whip-like tail crashed through the trees nearby. It was a world of primal, understandable threats. Here, danger had teeth and claws, not scanners and energy hammers. He spent weeks in the wild. The hero's instincts gave way to the survivors. He used his strength to bring down small, boar-like creatures for food, cooking the meat with a carefully controlled burst of energy from his fingertips. He used Blackwhip to create snares and to scale the massive trees to find safe places to rest. He learned the rhythm of the jungle, the hunting grounds of the great beasts, the locations of fresh water. In the quiet moments, perched high in the canopy, looking out over a sea of green under an alien sky, the grief would return. It was a physical weight, a crushing emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. He would trace the names of his friends onto a broad leaf with a finger: Achiko, Tenya, Shoto, Kaken. The last one always made his throat tighten. He had spent so many years chasing Bakugo's shadow, and in the end, his rival's final act had been to try and save him. "He told you to live, damn nerd," he could almost hear the explosive retort. One day, while tracking a stream to its source, he found them. Humans. A tribe, living in a series of caves carved into the side of a cliff face. They were rugged folk, dressed in hides and leather, their skin tanned and their bodies lean and strong from a life of hardship. They were armed with primitive spears and bows, yet they survived in this monster-infested land. Deku didn't approach. He watched. It was second nature to him, the old habit of the quirkless boy studying heroes, now applied to a tribe of hunter-gatherers. He learned their patrol routes, their hunting patterns. He saw the way the elders cared for the children, the way the hunters shared their kills. They were a community, a flicker of something he thought he had lost forever. He saw their struggle, too. Their existence was precarious. He watched as a hunting party was forced to retreat from a massive, armor-plated triceratops-like beast, returning empty-handed and wounded. He saw a sickness sweep through the children, their faces pale with fever. They were constantly on the edge, a single bad hunt or a single predator attack away from disaster. Still, he remained apart. What right did he have to interfere? He was a ghost, a remnant of a dead world. This was their life, their struggle. His presence would only bring danger. The name Doom was not spoken here, but the fear of a higher power was woven into their superstitions, into their warnings about straying too far into the forbidden valleys where the metal men sometimes walked. Doom's influence was a cancer, present even in the wild heart of his planet. His self-imposed exile was shattered one evening. Danger sense flared, not with the familiar spike of a hungry dinosaur, but with a cold, sharp sting that spoke of malice and intent. From his perch in the trees overlooking the tribe's caves he saw them. They were not metal men, not members of the Thor Corps. These were slender, unnerving figures in dark, form-fitting suits, their faces obscured by metallic masks that glowed with a faint red light. They moved with a predatory grace that was utterly alien to this prehistoric world, carrying rifles that hummed with a low, menacing energy. There were 4 of them, and they were hurting something, or rather, someone. They had captured one of the tribe's hunters, a young woman Izuku had seen practicing with her bow earlier that day. Her hands were bound with glowing cuffs, and she struggled futilely against her captors. Specimen 47 Gamma, one of the masked figures said, its voice a synthesized, clinical monotone. Displays above-average physical resilience and a primitive but potent survival instinct. Baron Sinister will be pleased with this one's genetic stock. Baron Sinister. One of the feudal lords he'd heard about. And they were harvesting people, treating them like lab rats. The captured woman spat at one of her captors. My people will find me. They will make you pay, demons. The figure she spat on didn't even flinch. It simply raised its rifle. Insolence is an impurity. A slight genetic correction is in order. The rifle began to glow. Izuku felt a cold, familiar rage build in his chest. This was it. The same injustice, the same cruelty, just with a different mask. He had run. He had hidden. He had mourned. But he could not, would not, stand by and watch this happen. He was done being a ghost. He didn't announce his presence with a shout or a dramatic entrance. That was the old Deku. The new one, the survivor, was smarter. He was a creature of this jungle now. He would use it as his weapon. He moved through the canopy, a silent green blur. Using Black Whip, he grabbed a heavy, rotten log from the jungle floor and swung it like a pendulum. It smashed into one of the masked figures from the side, sending it crashing into a tree with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. Before the other 3 could react, he was on them. He dropped from the branches, his body wreathed in smokescreen. The dense vapor billowed around them, sowing instant confusion. Contact! We have an unknown hostile. One of them shouted, its synthesized voice tight with alarm. They fired their rifles blindly into the smoke. Beams of red energy sliced through the gloom, incinerating vines and blasting chunks out of trees, but Izuku was no longer where he had landed. He was moving, a predator in his element. He burst from the side of the smoke cloud, his legs sweeping out in a low arc. It connected with the knee of one of the figures, shattering the joint with a sound like snapping celery. As it went down, he used its falling body as a springboard, launching himself at the third. Black Whip shot out, not to strike, but to disarm. The tendrils wrapped around the figure's rifle and yanked. At the same time, Izuku dropped a smoke pellet, a tightly packed ball of leaves and damp moss he'd learned to make, at its feet. It was a primitive trick, but it worked. The figure was momentarily distracted, and Izuku landed a sharp, precise chop to the back of its neck, sending it crumpling to the ground. Only one remained, the leader. It had recovered from its initial shock and now stood its ground, its rifle aimed at the captured tribeswoman. Cease your aggression, anomaly! It commanded. Or the specimen will be terminated. Izuku froze at the edge of the smoke, his silhouette a threatening outline of green lightning. Let her go, he said, his voice low and hard, stripped of all its former hesitation. It was the voice of a hero who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. You are interfering with the work of Baron Sinister. That is a crime punishable by dissection, the figure stated calmly, its rifle still trained on the woman. Identify yourself. Izuku took a step forward. I'm the one telling you to let her go. For a tense second, they were locked in a standoff. Then, the woman, seeing her opportunity, acted. With a fierce cry, she headbutted the figure holding her, the crack of her forehead against its metal mask echoing in the clearing. The figure stumbled back, its aim faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all Izuku needed. He unleashed one for all at 15%, a controlled, contained explosion of power. He crossed the distance between them in less than a blink. He didn't use a named smash. It was a simple, brutal punch, aimed directly at the figure's chest. The impact wasn't a loud crack, but a deep, resonant thump, like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. The figure's armor buckled inwards, and it was thrown back a dozen meters, skipping off the ground once before lying still. Silence. The smoke slowly cleared, revealing the scene of carnage. 4 of Sinister's elite marauders, taken down in under a minute. The tribewoman was on the ground, staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and reverence. Her binds had shattered from the feedback of the attack on her captor. Izuku stood over the last marauder, his fists still clenched, green sparks dancing along his knuckles. He was breathing heavily, his body thrumming with adrenaline and power. He looked at the woman, his expression hidden by the shadows of the jungle. Without a word, he turned and melted back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. He didn't know it, but he had just started a war. And he had just been given a name. When the woman returned to her tribe, she didn't speak of a boy in a torn green suit. She spoke of a spirit of the forest, a vengeful god who moved like the wind and struck with the force of a falling mountain. She called him the Green Ghost. The raid stopped. For weeks, Sinister's marauders did not return. But Izuku's work was not done. He became the tribe's unseen guardian. When a monstrous, boar-like creature charged the caves, a precisely thrown boulder from an unseen source would strike its leg, crippling it. When a hunting party was cornered by a pack of vicious, raptor-like predators, a sudden, dense fog would roll in, allowing them to escape. He became a legend, a myth whispered around their campfires. His actions, however, did not go unnoticed by the powers that be. In a sterile, Gothic laboratory in the domain of Utopolis, Baron Nathaniel Essex, Mr. Sinister, watched a recording of the event on a floating screen. The footage was corrupted, flickering, but the image of a green blur dismantling his elite agents was clear enough. An anomaly, Sinister mused, a predatory smile stretching his pale features. Uncatalogued genetic potential. Such power, such speed. Not a mutant. Not an inhuman. Something new. He tapped a command into his console. This is a matter for a higher authority. An unregistered powerhouse operating outside the law is a direct threat to God's order. Let the Thor Corps handle this pest. Let them see what happens when they poke it. Far away, in the gleaming citadel of Doomstadt, an alert chimed on a grand console monitored by the Thor Corps command. An official request for intervention from Baron Sinister. The report detailed an unidentified hostile entity of significant power disrupting his operations in the Greenland domain. The Thor on duty, a grizzled veteran with a scarred face, read the report with a sigh. Another one of Baron Sinister's problems. Probably just wants us to clean up another one of his failed experiments. His partner, a younger, more eager Thor, looked over the data. But the energy readings, sir, they're off the charts. And chaotic. Not like anything I've seen before. The veteran grunted, pulling up a roster. This needs a delicate touch. Someone who can investigate without leveling half the domain. Someone who can tell the difference between a real threat and Sinister's political games. His finger scrolled down the list of names and stopped on one. Send Foster. She's worthy of this task. Tell her to investigate the anomaly in Greenland. Cautiously. Back in the jungle, Izuku was unaware of the cosmic gears he had set in motion. He was patching a wound in his side, a souvenir from a close call with a saber-toothed cat. He sat in his hidden alcove behind a waterfall, the roar of the water a constant, soothing presence. He had found a new purpose, however small. Protecting this tribe felt right. It was a pale echo of the life he'd lost, but it was enough. It was a reason to get up, to fight, to use the power that was both his gift and his curse. You're becoming a symbol again, Izuku. Nana's voice was soft in his mind, tinged with pride. Even here. It's not the same, he thought back, the old sadness creeping in. I'm not saving everyone. I'm just delaying the inevitable for a few. One life is not a statistic. Ninth, the second user cut in, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. It is a universe. You are honoring the legacy. That is enough. Suddenly his danger sense screamed. It wasn't the predatory hunger of a jungle beast. It wasn't the cold malice of the marauders. This was something else entirely. It felt like the air itself was being charged with immense power, like the moments before a lightning strike, but magnified 1,000 times. The waterfall beside him seemed to recoil, the water momentarily flowing upwards. He got to his feet, his body tense, every muscle coiled and ready. He looked up, through the cascading water, at the sky. There was no storm. The clouds were sparse. But he heard it. A low, growing rumble that was not thunder. A high-pitched whine that sounded like a turbine spinning up to impossible speeds. He raced out of his cave, emerging onto the slick rocks beside the waterfall. He looked towards the tribe's cliffside home. They were all outside, their faces turned to the sky in terror. They were pointing. Izuku followed their gaze. A speck of light was descending from the heavens, growing larger and brighter with each passing second. It was a falling star, burning a hole through the atmosphere. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was coming for him. He began to run, away from the tribe, deeper into the jungle. He had to lead it away. He couldn't let them be caught in the crossfire. The rumbling grew into a deafening roar. The light was blinding. He burst into a large, open clearing, the ground covered in soft moss and strange, bioluminescent fungi that cast an eerie blue glow. He spun around, planting his feet, ready for a fight. The object didn't slow. It wasn't landing, it was impacting. It slammed into the center of the clearing not 20 meters from him. Boom! The sound was absolute, a physical shockwave that tore through the air, ripping leaves from the trees and blasting Izuku off his feet. The ground heaved. He was thrown back, tumbling through the undergrowth, his ears ringing. He pushed himself up, shaking his head to clear it. In the center of the clearing was a newly formed crater, smoking and glowing with a faint blue energy. And nestled in the very center of the crater, completely unharmed, humming with a power that made the fillings in his teeth ache, was a hammer. It was a square-headed, short-handled war hammer, forged from a silvery metal that seemed to drink the light. Intricate patterns were etched into its surface, and it pulsed with a steady, rhythmic blue light, like a mechanical heart. Izuku stared, his mind racing. A weapon. Someone had thrown a weapon from the sky as a warning. Or an invitation. Then, a second sound reached him over the ringing in his ears. The sound of a much gentler landing. He looked up to the edge of the crater. Standing there, silhouetted against the glowing hammer, was a figure. It was a woman, clad in the same stylized Norse armor as the Thor core from the city, but hers was more ornate, more refined. A winged helmet sat on her head, from which a long, blonde ponytail cascaded. Her face was strong, etched with lines of determination and a weariness that spoke of countless battles. A red cape billowed behind her in a wind that wasn't there. Her eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue, scanned the clearing and landed on him. There was no malice in her gaze, but there was an unshakable authority. She was not a brute or a bully. She was a warrior. A judge. She took a step forward, her armored boots making no sound on the scorched earth. "I am Thor, of the Thor Corps, loyal servant of God Emperor Doom," she announced, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the clearing with an effortless power. "I have been sent to investigate an anomaly, a disruption to the ordained peace of this domain." Her eyes narrowed, taking in his torn costume, the green sparks that still danced around his fists, and the defiant look on his face. "I believe I have found it." The air in the clearing crackled, thick with a tension that was more than just the residual energy from the hammer's impact. It was the pressure of two opposing ideologies about to collide, two definitions of justice condensed into the space between a boy who had lost everything and a woman who served a god. Izuku's mind, a whirlwind of analysis and instinct, was already cataloging the threat. Thor Core. High-ranking, based on the armor? She called herself Thor, not a Thor. A title? The hammer is the source of the energy readings. Thrown from orbit? No, teleported. The energy signature is wrong for atmospheric entry. She is the law. She's here for the green ghost. She's here for me. He rose slowly to his feet, brushing dirt and leaves from his battered costume. He didn't power up one for all, not yet. He kept the energy coiled tight within him, a sleeping dragon of green lightning, ready to be unleashed. He had learned in Technopolis that a high-power signature was a target. Let her underestimate him. "I don't know anything about an anomaly," Izuku said, his voice steady, betraying none of the frantic calculations racing through his head. "I'm just lost." The woman, Jane Foster, tilted her head. Her expression was unreadable, a warrior's mask of stoic appraisal. Lost things don't dismantle a squad of sinister elite marauders without leaving a trace. Lost things don't become campfire stories for the local primitives. Her gaze was sharp, dissecting him. "You radiate an energy I've never encountered. It's not cosmic. It's not mystical. It feels alive. Tell me your name, boy. Tell me which world you were torn from to make this one." The question was a physical blow, a casual reminder of the gaping wound in his soul. Which world you were torn from. She knew. She understood the nature of Battle World. But she accepted it. She enforced the rule of the one who had built this cosmic graveyard. "My world is gone," Izuku replied, his voice dropping, taking on a cold, hard edge. "And my name doesn't matter. What matters is that your Baron was taking people." I stopped him. "You disrupted the order," Jane corrected, her voice firm, unwavering. "Baron Sinister's genetic tithes, while distasteful, are sanctioned by God Emperor Doom. They are part of the structure that keeps this world from collapsing back into the chaos from which it was born. You have broken the highest law. You are a rebel. A heretic." Izuku clenched his fists, the green sparks finally beginning to dance at his knuckles. "I call it being a hero." Jane's eyes narrowed. The word hung in the air, an ancient, forgotten concept in this land of brutal order. A noble sentiment. And a foolish one. The age of heroes ended when the multiverse died. There is only Doom's peace now. Surrender, and you may be granted a chance to serve his will. Resist, and you will be judged. She extended her hand towards the crater. The hammer Mjolnir rose from the scorched earth with a low hum, its blue light intensifying. It flew across the clearing and settled into her waiting palm with a familiar, comfortable weight. The moment she gripped it, the air pressure dropped. Lightning, raw and untamed, began to arc from the head of the hammer, crawling up her arms and making her eyes glow with celestial power. "This is your only warning," she said, her voice now amplified, booming with the power of a nascent storm. The fight began not with a charge, but with a flicker of Izuku's eyes. He glanced past Jane, towards the edge of the clearing where he knew a small family of the tribespeople, a hunter and his 2 young children, had been foraging. They were frozen in terror, mesmerized by the display of power. He had to end this fast, and he had to control the battlefield. "Eighth, can you feel her?" He sent the thought into the OFA network. "She is, strange, danger senses user, N, responded. The threat is not from her. It is from the hammer. The weapon is a nexus of immense power. Her body is just a conduit." "Fine," Izuku said aloud, dropping into a low fighting stance. "Let's see what your god's judgment looks like." He didn't charge. He exploded. One for all flared from 0 to 30% in a nanosecond. He used FA gene, releasing the kinetic energy he'd been storing just by standing still. The ground beneath his feet shattered as he launched himself forward, not at Jane, but to her left, aiming for the dense tree-line. He was a green comet, his speed blurring the world around him. Jane was not a brutish enforcer from Technopolis. She was a warrior. Her reaction was instantaneous. She didn't try to track his movement, she anticipated it. With a powerful swing, she hurled Mjolnir. The hammer didn't just fly, it tore through the air with a shriek of displaced atmosphere, trailing ozone and blue lightning. It wasn't aimed at where Izuku was, but where he was going to be. Danger Sense screamed a high-pitched, mind-splitting alarm. Izuku's body reacted before his mind could fully process the threat. He fired Black Whip behind him, the dark tendrils latching onto a massive tree trunk. He pulled, altering his trajectory midair with a violent, body-wrenching jerk. Mjolnir roared past the spot where his head had been a millisecond before. It slammed into the jungle, and the resulting explosion was catastrophic. Trees, vines, and earth were vaporized in a hemispheric blast of thunder and lightning. The shockwave sent him tumbling. He landed, rolling to dissipate the momentum, and came up in a crouch. The destruction was immense. 100-meter section of the jungle was simply gone, replaced by a smoking, glass crater. He looked back at Jane. Mjolnir was already flying back to her hand. "She's too powerful," he realized with a jolt of cold fear. That single attack held more destructive force than All Might's prime smashes. And she had done it with a casual flick of the wrist. This wasn't a fight he could win with brute force. He had to outthink her. Impressive reflexes, anomaly, Jane called out, her voice calm. But you cannot outrun the storm. She raised the hammer, and the sky, which had been clear moments before, began to darken. Clouds, black and angry, swirled into existence above the clearing, summoned by her will, lightning spiderwebbed between them. Izuku knew he couldn't stay in the open. He darted into the remaining forest, the massive trees providing some measure of cover. He had to use the environment. He had to be the green ghost. Smoke screen! He hissed, and a thick, cloying fog erupted from his body, blanketing the area. He pushed more power into it than ever before, creating a smokescreen so dense it was like swimming through ink. From above, Jane's voice boomed. You think you can hide from the god of thunder? A bolt of lightning, thick as a building, lanced down from the sky. It struck the center of his smoke cloud, and the world turned white. The thunderclap was a physical blow that shook his bones. The smoke was flash incinerated, and the ground where he'd been standing was now a pit of molten rock. But he was already gone. The moment he'd seen her summon the storm, he had acted. He had used the smoke as a cover for his real move. He channeled one for all into his legs and dug, kicking dirt and rock behind him like a maddened animal, burrowing into the soft jungle floor. The lightning had struck meters above his subterranean hiding spot. He burst from the ground behind her, mud and grime flying from his suit. He didn't waste the element of surprise on a grand attack. He went for the weapon. Black whip shot from his arms, dozens of tendrils converging on Mjolnir. This time, Jane was ready. She spun, and a pulse of energy erupted from the hammer, a 360-degree wave of pure force. It shredded the tips of his black whip tendrils and slammed into Izuku's chest. It felt like being hit by a freight train. The air was driven from his lungs in a single, painful gasp. He was hurled backward, his ribs screaming in protest. He crashed through the undergrowth, his body ragged and broken. He lay there for a moment, the world spinning. The pain was immense, a deep, resonant ache that was quickly being numbed by the adrenaline of OFA's healing factor. He could already feel his hairline rib fractures knitting themselves back together. She adapts too quickly, he thought, coughing up a bit of blood. She learns. I can only surprise her once with each trick. He heard her walking towards him, her armored boots crunching on the forest floor. He had to move. He forced himself to his feet, leaning against a tree. It's over, boy, Jane said, her voice softer now, tinged with something that might have been pity. She stood at the edge of the tree-line, Mjolnir held loosely at her side. You fought with honor, but you cannot win. There is no shame in yielding to the will of God. Izuku looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a rebel or an anomaly in his eyes, but a hero. A tired, wounded, but utterly unbreakable hero. Is this peace you're fighting for worth the cost? He asked, his voice raw but clear. He pushed himself off the tree, standing tall despite the pain. A world where a man can't get medicine for his sick daughter? A world where people are harvested like cattle because a baron wants to check their genes? A world where people live in fear? That isn't a world worth saving. It's a prison. His words struck a chord. He could see it in the flicker of her eyes, the slight tightening of her grip on the hammer. These were not the wild ravings of a heretic. They were the measured, painful truths of a man who believed, to the very core of his being, in something more. They were echoes of doubts she herself had harbored, whispers she had pushed down in the name of order and survival. Doom saved us, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. He saved what little of reality was left. Without him, there would be nothing. Only chaos. There's a difference between order and control, Izuku countered, taking a shaky step forward. All Might, my mentor, he taught me that true peace comes from people feeling safe. Not from being afraid. Your god offers security in a cage. A real hero offers hope. A tense silence fell between them. Jane looked at this boy, covered in mud and blood, his suit torn, his body bruised, yet his spirit was a blazing inferno. He spoke of heroes and hope as if they were real, tangible things, not just legends from the dead worlds. Then, The sound of a child's scream shattered the moment. They both turned. The hunter's family, who had been hiding at the edge of the clearing, were now in mortal danger. The battle had dislodged a massive rock formation on the cliffside above them. A huge chunk of granite, the size of a small car, was now plummeting directly towards them. The hunter was frozen in terror, shielding his children with his body, a futile gesture against tons of falling rock. Jane reacted instantly. She started to raise her hammer, preparing to blast the rock to pieces. But Izuku was faster. He didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh the odds. He saw people in danger, and he acted. One for all, 100%, the world exploded in green light. The coiled dragon within him was unleashed. Power, raw and immense, flooded his system. His muscles swelled, his bones creaked under the strain, and emerald lightning, thicker and more violent than anything he had shown before, erupted from his body, scorching the ground around him. His arm, already aching, felt like it was being torn apart from the inside. He didn't care. He crossed the distance to the family in a single, reality-bending leap. He was a streak of light, a living thunderbolt. He landed between the family and the falling rock, planting his feet and looking up. Time seemed to slow. He saw the terrified faces of the children, the father's look of utter disbelief. He saw the rough, pitted surface of the boulder as it filled his vision. He brought both hands up, lacing his fingers together. This wasn't a smash to destroy. This was a shield to protect. Wyoming smash. He met the falling mountain with the force of a tectonic plate. The impact was not a crash, but a deep, resonant boom that was felt more than heard. The air pressure blast flattened every tree within a 50-meter radius. The ground beneath his feet turned to powder. For a terrifying second, it seemed like the rock would win. His arms screamed, the bones fracturing and grinding together under the impossible weight. Red lines of pain spiderwebbed up his skin, visible even through the green lightning. Not enough! He screamed in his mind, and the vestiges answered. All 8 of them. Their will, their power, their hope, surged into him in a unified wave. Plus. Ultra! He roared, the cry of a dying world, the promise of its greatest hero. The green energy around him intensified, turning from emerald to a blinding, sun-like white. He gave it everything. Not just 100%, but all the pain, all the grief, all the loss. He channeled the memory of All Might's final stand, of Bakugo's sacrifice, of Uraraka's trusting eyes. With a final, catastrophic push, he didn't just stop the boulder. He disintegrated it. It exploded outwards into a shower of gravel and dust, harming no one. The light faded. Izuku stood there for a moment, his arms hanging limp and grotesquely twisted at his sides, purple and black from the catastrophic damage. Smoke rose from his skin. Then, his strength gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, his head bowed, panting for breath. He had saved them. That was all that mattered. Jane Foster stood frozen, Mjolnir hanging forgotten in her hand. She had seen power before. She had stood with gods and cosmic beings. But she had never seen anything like that. It wasn't just the strength, it was the why. He hadn't used that incredible power to fight her, to win, to dominate. He had saved it, endured a beating, all to have it ready for the moment he needed to protect someone else. He had willingly, joyously, shattered himself to save total strangers. It was the single most heroic act she had witnessed since the end of the universe. The father grabbed his children and, after a single, awestruck look at Izuku, fled into the jungle, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the divine and terrifying act he had just witnessed. Izuku was alone again with the Thor, kneeling, broken, and utterly defenseless. Jane walked slowly towards him, her footsteps heavy on the devastated ground. She stood over him, her shadow falling across his slumped form. He didn't look up. He had nothing left. Her own heart was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Her duty to Doom, the god who had given her a purpose and a world to protect. And the undeniable, brilliant truth of what she had just seen. This boy, this anomaly, was more of a hero than anyone she had met on Battleworld. He embodied an ideal she thought had died with her Thor, with the captains and the iron men of her long-lost home. She looked at the boy kneeling before her, then down at the hammer in her hand. Mjolnir, the hammer of the mighty Thor, inscribed with the words, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." Worthiness. It wasn't about strength, or loyalty, or the ability to follow orders. It was about character. It was about the willingness to sacrifice for others. It was about everything this boy had just demonstrated. An idea, insane and heretical, sparked in her mind. A test. Slowly, deliberately, she placed Mjolnir on the ground in front of the kneeling Izuku. The blue light of the hammer pulsed softly, illuminating the boy's bowed head. Izuku finally looked up, his pain-filled eyes confused. He saw the hammer, lying there on the churned earth. "My God demands I bring you to him for judgment," Jane said, her voice quiet, stripped of all its godly power. "My orders are to arrest you, by any means necessary." She took a step back, her hands empty at her sides. "But I serve a higher law than the will of a king," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "I serve the cause of justice. The spirit of heroism." She nodded towards the hammer. "The law of doom says you are a criminal. But there is an older law at work here. If you are what you say you are, if you are truly a hero, then prove it. Lift it." Izuku stared at her, then at the hammer. He didn't understand. It was a trick. It had to be. "It's a trap, Ninth," the second user warned. "She's trying to trick you." But Nana Shimura's voice was a soft whisper. "No, look at her eyes, Izuku. She's testing you. She's testing herself." He looked at his arms. They were a ruined mess. He couldn't even make a fist. But he had to try. This was more than a challenge. It was a question. And he had to answer. With a pained grunt, he shuffled forward on his knees. He reached out with his right arm, a mangled limb of purple flesh and protruding bone. His fingers, broken and useless, trembled as they hovered over the leather-wrapped grip. He took a breath. He thought of All Might. He thought of his friends. He thought of his purpose. Save people with a smile. He closed his hand around the handle, and nothing happened. The hammer didn't budge. It was as if it were fused to the bedrock of the planet. He pulled, his shattered muscles screaming, but it was useless. It was just a heavy, unmovable lump of metal. A single, hot tear of frustration and failure rolled down his cheek and splattered on the hammer's surface. He had failed. He wasn't worthy. He was just a ghost, a failure who couldn't even save his own world. He slumped forward, his forehead resting on the cool metal of the hammer, defeated. Jane watched, a pang of disappointment in her chest. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps heroism really was dead. But then, something happened. The hammer began to hum. A low, resonant thrum that vibrated through Izuku's skull. The blue light within it began to pulse faster, brighter. On its surface, the intricate etchings began to glow with a white gold light. "It's scanning you," the first user whispered in awe. "No, not scanning. It's listening. It's reading the story within you. The story of one for all." The hammer was not just a weapon. It was a semi-sentient magical artifact, a repository of honor and nobility. And it was sensing the legacy within Izuku. It sensed not one noble heart, but 9. It felt Yoichi's defiance against tyranny. It felt the second and third's desperate struggle for freedom. It felt Haikage's lonely vigil, Daigoro's heroic charisma, An's hidden resolve, and Nana's boundless compassion. It felt All Might's shining, earth-shaking love for humanity. And it felt Izuku's own pure, unbreakable desire to save everyone. It sensed a lineage of worthiness. A dynasty of sacrifice. Lightning, golden and pure, not the blue of Jane's power, suddenly arced from the hammer. It wasn't an attack. It was an embrace. It enveloped Izuku's broken arm, and he cried out, not in pain, but in shock. The light was warm, restorative. He felt the bones in his arm snap back into place. The torn muscles weave themselves back together. In a matter of seconds, his arm, which should have taken weeks to heal, was whole again. Scarred but whole. The golden light faded. The hammer's blue glow returned to its soft, steady pulse. Izuku stared at his healed hand, then at the hammer, then at Jane. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly agape in utter disbelief. He still couldn't lift it. He wasn't a Thor. But the hammer, the ultimate judge of worthiness, had looked into his soul and deemed him a hero. It had not given him its power, but it had given him its blessing. Jane Foster let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It came out as a shaky, half-believing laugh. She walked forward and knelt in front of him. I am a Thor of Battleworld. My oath is to God Emperor Doom. My duty is to his law. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression now one of dawning, dangerous resolve. But my faith has been shaken. She stood up and took a communications device from her belt. Thor to Doomstat, she said, her voice once again official and cold. Report, a tinny voice crackled back. I have located the source of the disturbance, Jane said, her eyes never leaving Izuku's. It was a minor atmospheric event clashing with the Baron's local technology. The anomaly is resolved. The Greenland domain is secure. Returning to patrol, she crushed the communicator in her fist. The Eye of Doom sees all, she said, her voice now a low whisper meant only for him. But even God has blind spots. My report just created one for you. Use it. She extended her hand and effortlessly picked up Mjolnir. He will know something happened here. The energy expenditure was too great. He will send others. More powerful than me. You can't stay here. You can't just be a local ghost anymore. She turned to leave. Wait. Izuku called out, scrambling to his feet. Who are you? Why are you helping me? Jane paused at the edge of the crater, looking back at him over her shoulder. My name is Jane Foster. And I'm helping you because you reminded me of what the word hero is supposed to mean. With that, she raised her hammer to the sky. A rainbow bridge of crackling energy lanced down, enveloping her. And then she was gone. Izuku stood alone in the devastated clearing, his healed arm tingling with residual magic. He was no longer just a survivor. He was no longer just a ghost. He was a recognized threat to this world's god, and he had an ally in the heart of the enemy's army. He looked down at his hands, clenching them into fists. He couldn't just survive. He couldn't just protect one tribe. He had to fight back. He had to find the source of this world's power, to find Doom himself. He asked the question to the chorus in his soul, to the lineage of heroes that the hammer had seen. How do you fight a god? And for the first time, it was All Might's voice, faint but clear as a bell, that answered him from within the embers of One for All. First, my boy, first you must give the people a symbol. The blessing of Mjolnir had healed Izuku's body, but Jane Foster's warning had left a fresh wound in his mind. He will send others. More powerful than me. The Greenland domain, once a refuge, was now a liability. To stay would be to bring Doom's wrath down upon the very people he had sworn to protect. He was a lightning rod, and the storm he was attracting was the most powerful being in existence. His departure was as silent and unseen as his guardianship had been. He left a final gift for the tribe, a massive, freshly hunted reptilian beast, enough to feed them for a week, and then he melted back into the jungle, his new heading dictated by a desperate, half-formed plan. He had to find others. Not just allies, but people who remembered. People who knew the lie of Battleworld for what it was. Jane's words had confirmed what he suspected. This world was a collage of broken pieces. That meant other survivors might exist. Remnants of other Earths, other realities, now trapped in this cosmic prison. These were the whispers he needed to chase. He moved between domains like a phantom, a process that was as disorienting as it was dangerous. The borders were not lines on a map but shimmering, unstable zones where the laws of reality frayed. One moment he would be pushing through the humid, prehistoric jungle of Greenland, the next he would stumble through a shimmering curtain of energy, and find himself in the middle of a windswept, red rock desert straight out of an old western, the Killville domain. He learned to navigate by observing the Thor patrols. Their flight paths were the highways of Battleworld. Where they flew, civilization, and thus information, could be found. He stayed low, using smokescreen and the natural cover of the bizarre landscapes, a ghost haunting the edges of Doom's empire. In a dusty saloon in Killville, where cyborg cowboys gambled with gears and bullets, he overheard two grizzled prospectors talking about relics from the crash. They spoke of strange artifacts that sometimes fell from the sky near the borders of the Deadlands, a territory supposedly so toxic and cursed that not even the Thors would patrol it. Another time, hiding in the rigging of a skyship sailing over the kingdom of Manhattan, a bizarre fusion of 1920s New York and a high-tech metropolis, he listened to couriers trading gossip. They spoke in hushed tones of a ghost sector in Utopolis, a place where people who remembered too much were taken by Baron Sinister and never seen again. Utopolis. The name kept coming up. The domain of the gene-harvesting Baron Sinister. It was a nexus, a place of advanced science and dark secrets. If there was a resistance, its seeds would be buried deep in that poisoned soil. His path towards Utopolis forced him through a territory that made his danger sense scream with a constant, nauseating thrum. The sky here was a bruised purple, lit by the sickly glow of a perpetual, toxic aurora. The ground was black, cracked obsidian, and the air was thick with the stench of sulfur and ozone. Holographic banners bearing a skull and crossbones sigil hung from jagged metal spires. This was the domain of the Cabal. Its name was spoken only in fearful whispers, the kingdom of Thanos. Here, Doom's law was a thin veneer over a festering pit of pure evil. Thors patrolled the borders, but they did not enter. This was a place where cruelty was a virtue and strength was the only law. Izuku saw things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Enslaved populaces from a dozen different species toiling under the crack of energy whips. Brutal gladiatorial games where the loser was not just killed, but erased from memory by hooded figures wielding strange scepters. This wasn't the cold, sterile tyranny of doom. It was the hot, bubbling malice of beings who enjoyed suffering. It taught him a vital, terrifying lesson. There were far worse things in this universe than God Emperor Doom. Doom offered a prison. The Cabal offered hell. He was slinking through the shadows of a massive, brutalist fortress when he saw him. On a balcony overlooking a courtyard where two hulking beasts were being forced to fight to the death, stood a giant. He was purple-skinned, his jawline like a geological formation, and he wore golden armor that seemed to absorb the sickly light of the sky. He sat on a throne made of dark, pitted stone, his expression one of profound, cosmic boredom. Beside him stood a lithe, blue-skinned woman with a cruel smile and a three-pronged spear. Proxima midnight. And the titan on the throne could only be Thanos. Izuku froze, flattening himself into an alcove. He was 100 meters away, shrouded in shadow and a low-level smoke screen, but he felt as if the titan's gaze could pierce the veil and flay him raw. Leave. Now. The second user's voice was a blade of ice in his mind. This is not a battle. This is an extinction event. You cannot fight him. Izuku knew he was right. This was a being whose very presence warped the space around him. But as he began to retreat, Thanos' head tilted, a minute, almost imperceptible movement. His gaze swept over the courtyard, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes, deep, intelligent, and ancient, seemed to pass directly over Izuku's hiding place. Izuku's blood ran cold. Danger sense didn't just spike, it detonated. He felt a pressure on his mind, a casual, crushing psychic inquiry. It wasn't an attack, more like a giant swatting at a fly it had barely noticed. The vestiges rallied instantly, forming a psychic shield around his consciousness. The pressure receded as quickly as it had come. On the balcony, Thanos grunted, a low rumble of annoyance. A flea, he muttered to Proxima Midnight, his voice a gravelly bass that carried across the courtyard. Insignificant but irritating. He looked back at the arena, his interest already lost. The psychic probe had found nothing but a flicker, a mote of dust with an unexpectedly hard shell. Izuku didn't wait. He fled. He ran faster than he ever had before, pushing one for all into his legs until the world was a blur. He didn't stop until he was miles away, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but it had shaken him more than his battle with Jane Foster. Jane was a warrior bound by a code. Thanos was a force of nature, a nihilistic god who would kill him with a passing thought and forget him by the next. He had survived, but the encounter had hardened his resolve. He had to find the others. Fighting alone against this level of power was not heroism, it was suicide. Utopolis was a city of gleaming spires and dark secrets. From a distance, it looked like a paradise, a city of scientific marvels where advanced technology had eradicated disease and want. But up close, the perfection was unnerving. The citizens were all beautiful, all healthy, all eerily similar. They moved with a placid grace, their faces serene and emotionless. It was the forced, manufactured perfection of a dollhouse. And at its center stood sinister citadel, a twisted, Gothic structure of black metal and glowing green crystal that looked like a tumor on the city's heart. Izuku moved through the city's underbelly, its maintenance tunnels and sewer systems. The whispers he'd been chasing became clearer here. He heard tales of blanks, people who had been taken by Sinister's gene cops and returned, empty. Their memories of the world before wiped clean, and he heard of the Rememberers, a rumored resistance cell that helped people escape before the blanks got them. He found them not through a heroic confrontation, but through a simple act of kindness. He saw an old woman drop a bundle of synth bread. Before she could bend down, a young, handsome man in the pristine white uniform of the Utopolis citizenry stepped forward. "Allow me, madam," the young man said, his voice pleasant but utterly devoid of warmth. "It is against protocol for the elderly to strain themselves." As he bent down, his eyes met the old woman's, and a flicker of something cold and predatory passed between them. Danger sense prickled at the back of Izuku's neck. This wasn't a citizen. This was a hunter, a gene cop in disguise. Izuku acted. He didn't use a smash. He didn't use Black Whip. He used a simple trick. He released a tiny, almost invisible wisp of smoke screen near a ventilation grate upwind. The smoke, laced with a pungent chemical he found in the sewers, billowed out into the street. It wasn't harmful, but it was foul. People coughed, their perfect serenity broken. In the confusion, Izuku, his face obscured by a scavenged hood and mask, slipped through the crowd. He accidentally bumped into the gene cop, hard. At the same time, he grabbed the old woman's arm. "This way," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. He pulled her into an alleyway just as the gene cop was recovering his balance. The old woman stumbled after him, her eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" she gasped. "Someone who doesn't like bullies," Izuku replied, pulling her deeper into the labyrinth of alleys. "You're one of them, aren't you? A rememberer?" The old woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I don't know what you're talking about." "He was going to take you," Izuku pressed. "You have the look. I've seen it on the faces of people in the slums of Technopolis. You remember the sun. The real one." Her facade crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes. How did you know?" "Because I remember it, too," he said softly. The woman led him on a winding path through the city's hidden ways, through secret doors disguised as crumbling walls and down service ladders into the darkness. They emerged in a massive, disused subterranean reservoir. The air was cool and damp, and the only light came from a few jury-rigged power lamps. In the center of the cavern, a small community of people was gathered. They were a motley crew, a stark contrast to the uniform perfection of the city above. There were humans of all shapes and sizes, a few blue-skinned Kree, and even a stoic, rock-skinned Cronin. They were the city's outcasts, the people who refused to forget. A man stepped forward to greet them. He was tall and regal, with an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He wore simple black clothes, but he carried himself like a king. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and held a deep, profound sadness. Izuku recognized the look. It was the look of a leader who had lost his nation. "Thank you for bringing her back, stranger," the man said, his voice a smooth, low baritone with a faint, regal accent. "You took a great risk." "It was no risk," the old woman said, her voice filled with awe. "He moved like a spirit." The gene cop never even saw him. The man's gaze fell on Izuku, and it was like being weighed and measured by a master strategist. "You are not from Utopolis. Your clothes, your energy, you are an outsider." "Who are you?" Izuku pulled down his hood. He was tired of hiding. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. My world, it's gone. I'm looking for people who want to fight back against Doom." A murmur went through the assembled group. To speak so openly of fighting Doom was tantamount to suicide. The leader held up a hand for silence. "I am Chala," he said. "And these are my people. The last sons and daughters of Wakanda, and others who refused to bow." Chala. Black Panther. Izuku's mind, a repository of heroic data from his own world's pre-Quirk era comics and films, raced. He was standing before royalty. A hero king, but this Chala was different from the stories. He was harder, his eyes haunted. "We are not a resistance," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "We are survivors. We hide, we endure, we remember. We do not fight. To fight doom is to invite annihilation. But to live like this isn't living," Izuku argued, his voice ringing with a passion that seemed alien in this damp, hopeless cavern. "It's waiting to die. Hiding in the dark isn't a strategy. It's a tomb." A new voice cut in, sharp and laced with a familiar New York sarcasm. "Easy for you to say, kid. You weren't there when he snuffed out the sun." A figure emerged from the shadows, leaning against a rusted pillar. He was thin, dressed in a red and blue suit that was patched and faded. The iconic spider emblem was still visible on his chest. He pulled off his mask, revealing the tired, cynical face of an older Peter Parker. "We had a plan," Peter said, his voice heavy with the memory of failure. "Reed, Chala, Carol, all the big brains. We built a life raft. A way to survive the final incursion. We thought we could ride out the storm, find a way to fix things." He gestured around the cavern. "This is what's left of that plan. A handful of us made it. Doom got the rest. He took Reed's power, caged Carol, and scattered the rest of us across this hell's cape. We fought him. And we lost. Spectacularly." Izuku looked at these legendary heroes. They were broken. The hope had been beaten out of them. They were just like he had been in those first few days, hollowed out by loss. "So that's it?" Izuku asked, his voice rising. "You just give up? What about all the people who died? What about the worlds you lost? Don't you owe it to them to try? What can we do, boy?" Chala countered, his voice a low growl of frustration. "He is a god. He controls reality itself. His Thors are everywhere. His barons control every territory. We have no weapons, no army, no hope. You have me," Izuku said simply. The statement hung in the air, audacious and almost arrogant. Peter Parker let out a short, humorless laugh. "Kid, I've seen gods bleed. I've fought alongside the Hulk. You're just a kid in a torn costume." Izuku knew words weren't enough. He had to show them. He looked at Chala. "There's a patrol of Gene cops sweeping this sector. I've been tracking them. They'll be at the main reservoir conduit in 10 minutes. 4 of them, standard energy rifles, light armor." Chala's eyes narrowed. "An impressive analysis. Assuming it's accurate." "Let me prove it," Izuku said. "Let me show you what I can do." 10 minutes later, Izuku stood in a narrow maintenance tunnel, the air thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. He was alone. Chala, Peter, and a few of the Wakandan warriors watched from a grated catwalk 20 feet above, hidden in the darkness. "This is a bad idea," Peter whispered, his arms crossed. "The kid's gonna get himself killed." "Patience, Spider," Chala murmured, his eyes fixed on the green-clad figure below. "There is something about him. A fire I have not seen in a very long time." They heard the rhythmic clang of armored boots approaching. 4 of Sinister's Gene cops, their faces hidden by emotionless silver masks, rounded the corner. "Sector sweep clear," one of them reported into his comms. "No signs of biological anomalies or memory heretics." Izuku stepped out of the shadows. "You missed one." The Gene cops reacted instantly, raising their rifles. But Izuku was already moving. He wasn't the brawler they might have expected. He was a strategist. Smoke screen. The tunnel was plunged into a thick, impenetrable fog. The Gene cop's helmet displays immediately switched to thermal, but it was useless. From the catwalk, Peter's eyes widened. "Whoa! That's a neat trick." "Black whip!" Tendrils of dark energy shot out from the smoke, but not at the cops. They latched onto the ceiling, the walls, the floor. In seconds, the tunnel was a chaotic spider's web of black energy. The Gene cops, blinded and disoriented, stumbled into the tendrils. They were snared, their legs and arms tangled. Izuku then used float to rise silently to the ceiling, moving through the web like a spider. He was directly above them, a predator they couldn't see or hear. He dropped. He landed on the shoulders of one cop, using the momentum to flip forward and land a powerful double kick to the chest of another, sending him flying back into his entangled comrades like a bowling pin. 2 were down. The remaining 2 opened fire blindly, their energy blasts ricocheting wildly off the tunnel walls. He's analyzing their firing patterns, Chala breathed, his voice filled with awe. He could see the micro-movements Izuku was making, the slight shifts in position between each blast, anticipating the ricochets. Izuku moved in a blur. He used a 5% Manchester smash, a sweeping axe kick, to shatter the rifle of one cop, then followed up with a precise chop to the neck. The final cop spun around, trying to get a lock, but Izuku was too close. He used the Delaware smash air flick, not to harm, but to create a deafening bang right next to the cop's helmet. The soldier cried out, disoriented by the sonic blast, and Izuku disarmed him with a simple, efficient movement. The entire fight had taken less than 30 seconds. The 4 elite Gene cops were on the ground, disarmed and unconscious. The smoke cleared to reveal Izuku standing in the middle of his black web, not even breathing heavily. Silence reigned in the tunnel, broken only by the drip of water. On the catwalk above, Peter Parker was speechless. Chala's stoic expression had broken, replaced by one of stunned disbelief. "My word," the king of Wakanda whispered. Later, back in the reservoir, the mood had changed. The despair was gone, replaced by a fragile, flickering spark of something else. Hope. They sat around a makeshift table, Izuku nursing a bottle of purified water. Chala and Peter were there, along with a woman whose presence radiated pure power, even when she was sitting still. She had blonde hair, cut short, and a fire in her eyes that even doom couldn't extinguish. "Captain Carol Danvers, your analysis of their patrol patterns was flawless," Chala said, his voice holding a newfound respect. "Your combat prowess is formidable. That power, one for all you call it? I have never seen anything like it." "It's a quirk," Izuku explained, launching into a condensed history of his world, of heroes, of All Might, and the sacred torch he now carried. He told them everything, ending with the White Void and his arrival on Battleworld. When he finished, the cavern was silent. Peter looked at him, his cynical mask gone, replaced by a look of profound empathy. "A whole universe, kid, I'm sorry. I don't need pity," Izuku said, his voice firm. "I need allies. You said Doom took your powers, scattered your team. But you're still here. You're still heroes." "We're survivors," Carol Danvers corrected, her voice raspy. Doom had done something to her, suppressed her connection to her cosmic power, but the fire of the fighter was still there. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Izuku challenged. "You survived for a reason. You're here to finish the fight. All of you." Chala leaned forward, his hands steepled. "Even with your power, a direct assault is impossible. Doom is a god. To defeat him, we need to understand the source of his divinity." "Reed Richards," Peter supplied. "Doom has him. He's the only one smart enough to figure out how Doom's holding this all together. He's a prisoner somewhere in Doomstadt, in Castle Doom itself." "Then that's our goal," Izuku said, a plan beginning to form in his analytical mind. "We don't fight Doom's armies. We cut the head off the snake. We get to Reed Richards, find the source of Doom's power, and we shut it down." It was a crazy, impossible plan. A suicide mission into the heart of God's fortress. A few years ago, Izuku Midoriya would have dismissed it as reckless. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He had seen the end of everything. He had nothing left to lose, and a multiverse of ghosts to avenge. Chala looked at this boy from another world, this strange, sad, powerful child who burned with a light he thought had been extinguished forever. He looked at Peter, who was already starting to calculate infiltration routes. He looked at Carol, whose fists were clenched, a spark of defiance in her eyes. The king of a dead nation made a decision. He stood up, his regal bearing returning in full. "For years, we have hidden in the darkness, clinging to the memory of what was," Chala declared, his voice echoing through the cavern. "This boy has brought the dawn." He turned to Izuku, his expression firm, resolute. "Izuku Midoriya, we do not know you. You are an unknown quantity from a drowned world. But you fight with the heart of a hero and the mind of a king." He extended his hand. "The Avengers fell when the worlds died. That name is a painful memory. But we will stand with you. We will be your allies." Izuku took his hand. The grip was firm, the grip of a king making a vow. For the first time since he had watched his world dissolve into the color of nothing, Izuku Midoriya did not feel alone. He felt a flicker of hope. It was a small, fragile thing in this world of despair, but it was enough. It was a start. And it was a spark that was about to set the whole of Battle World on fire. Hope, Izuku discovered, was a dangerous and intoxicating fuel. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was part of a team. The subterranean reservoir, once a tomb of despair, was now a buzzing hive of clandestine activity. Chala's regal presence brought order, Peter's restless energy brought innovation, and Carol's military mind brought a sharp, tactical edge to their planning. But it was Izuku's power, the raw, undeniable potential of One for All, that gave their hopes substance. Their goal was audacious: infiltrate Castle Doom and rescue Reed Richards. But Chala, ever the strategist, knew they couldn't risk a direct assault on the heart of the kingdom without testing their new alliance and gauging the enemy's response. They needed a trial run, a mission that was both a practical necessity and a symbolic statement. Doom holds many of our allies captive, Chala explained, pointing to a holographic map of Battle World projected from a Wakandan kimoyo bead. The map flickered, showing the various domains. They are scattered, but there is a concentration of them in a high-security detention facility in the domain of Future Imperfect. The name sent a chill down Peter's spine. The Maestro's territory. A nuclear wasteland ruled by a crazier, crueler version of the Hulk. You're saying Doom built a prison in his backyard? A clever arrangement, Chala noted. The Maestro keeps the prisoners contained in exchange for his autonomy. The prison itself is technologically advanced, run by Doom's forces, but the territory is a natural deterrent. No one is foolish enough to attempt a breakout through a radioactive hellscape ruled by a Gamma-Gorge tyrant. No one until now, Carol Danvers finished, a grim smile on her face. Her arms were crossed, her cosmic power still suppressed, but the fire in her eyes burned brighter than ever. Who's in this prison? Valeria and Franklin Richards for two, Peter said softly, the names weighing heavily in the air. Reed's kids? Also, members of the X-Men, some of the Guardians, anyone Doom deemed too powerful or too rebellious to be re-educated. The mission was clear. Freeing the heroes would not only bolster their own ranks but also serve as a massive blow to Doom's authority. It was a declaration of war. Izuku felt a familiar thrill, the nervous energy that always came before a big hero operation. But this time, it was different. He wasn't a student following a pro's lead. Chala had made it clear, Izuku was the tip of their spear. Your power is our greatest asset, Izuku, Chala had said during the planning session. Carol and I will lead a diversionary strike on the Maestro's outer patrols. We will draw his attention, make him believe the attack is on him. Peter, your knowledge of StarTech, which forms the basis of the prison's security, will get us inside. But once the alarms go off, you, Izuku, are our sledgehammer. You will be the main offensive force. You break the walls, you break the guards, you clear the path. It was a solid plan, a classic feint and strike operation. But as they prepared, a cold knot of dread formed in Izuku's stomach. His danger sense was a low, persistent hum, a warning that was not tied to any specific threat but to the mission itself. It felt too easy, as if they were walking into a room where a predator was patiently waiting in the shadows. The landscape of Future Imperfect was a testament to the folly of man. Skeletal skyscrapers clawed at a perpetually gray, radioactive sky. The ground was a graveyard of rusted metal and cracked concrete, the wind a mournful howl that carried the taste of ash. Izuku, his costume now patched with scavenged leather and gray fabric for camouflage, moved silently alongside Peter Parker through the ruins of a forgotten city. Stark always had a flair for the dramatic, Peter quipped, his voice a low whisper over their comms link. He pointed to a massive, brutalist structure squatting in the center of the wasteland like a concrete toad. The ISO-cube. Maximum security, zero escape. He designed it to hold gods. Can you get us in? Izuku asked, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Automated gun turrets swiveled with unnerving precision, and he could see the telltale shimmer of an energy shield around the facility. Can a spider spin a web? Peter replied with a flash of his old confidence. He pulled out a small, multifaceted device. This little beauty is a techno key I whipped up from some old Stark and Wakandan tech. It won't bring the shield down. That would set off every alarm from here to Doomstat. But it should be able to trick the shield into thinking we're a garbage drone on its regular run. We'll have about 4.6 seconds to get through the gap. As they waited for the opportune moment, Izuku watched Chala and Carol on a small holo display. Their part of the plan was underway. They were engaging the Maestro's patrols on the far side of the territory, a symphony of explosions and energy blasts lighting up the horizon. The distraction was working. The prison's external sensors were all focused on the distant battle. Now! Peter hissed. He activated the techno key. A tiny section of the shimmering shield fizzled and dissolved. Izuku and Peter darted through the gap just as it sealed behind them. They were in. The interior was cold, sterile, and silent. White corridors stretched out under the buzz of fluorescent lights. The only sound was the low hum of the power conduits. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Something's wrong, Izuku whispered, his danger sense escalating from a hum to a sharp throb. Where are the guards? Maybe they all went to watch the fireworks. Peter suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. He was tapping away at a control panel, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Accessing prisoner manifest. Got it. They're in the central holding block, level Gamma. They moved with practiced stealth, a strange but effective partnership. Peter's intimate knowledge of the layout and security protocols guided them, while Izuku's heightened senses and ability to move in complete silence kept them hidden. They bypassed automated defenses and laser grids, flowing through the prison like ghosts. The silence was the most unnerving part. It felt unnatural, deliberate. It was the silence of a held breath. They reached the central holding block, a massive, cylindrical chamber lined with hundreds of glowing red energy cells. Inside each one, a figure was held in stasis. Izuku saw the fiery form of the Human Torch, the stoic, winged figure of Falcon, and the proud, white-haired Storm of the X-Men. They were all there, trophies in Doom's collection. Okay, kid, here's the deal, Peter said, plugging his key into the master control console. I can trigger a mass release, but the moment I do, this whole place will go into lockdown. Every automated defense, every robot guard Doom has stashed away will be on us. You ready to be that sledgehammer? Izuku nodded, green lightning already beginning to crackle around his fists. Ready. All right, on 3, Peter said, his finger hovering over the release command. 1, 2. Before he could say 3, a new voice echoed through the chamber. It was calm, resonant, and utterly terrifying. It was a voice that did not need to shout to command the attention of the universe. There will be no need for that, Spider-Man. The lights in the chamber flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. A single, golden spotlight snapped on, illuminating a figure standing at the far end of the control platform. He wore a high-collared blue tunic and was wrapped in a flowing, crimson cape that seemed to drink the darkness around it. His face was sharp and intelligent, his goatee meticulously trimmed, and his eyes held an ancient, weary power. The Eye of Agamotto, a gleaming golden amulet, rested on his chest, its own internal light pulsing softly. It was Dr. Stephen Strange. But the title projected on the prison's emergency displays was different. Sheriff Strange, the right hand of Doom. Izuku's blood ran cold. The dread he had felt, the sense of a waiting predator, this was it. This was the trap. Strange? Peter breathed, his voice a mixture of shock and betrayal. What are you doing? You're with him? I am where I must be, Strange replied, his voice devoid of emotion. I serve order. I serve the preservation of this last remaining reality. Your rebellion is a threat to that order. It is a child's tantrum in the face of oblivion. He's a tyrant, Stephen. Peter shot back. He's ruling on a throne of corpses. He is the architect of our survival, Strange countered, his calm unwavering. His will is the only thing holding the seams of this patchwork world together. Your freedom is a path back to the nothingness. He turned his gaze from Peter, and for the first time, his full, terrifying attention fell upon Izuku. And you, the sheriff said, his eyes seeming to pierce through Izuku's very soul. The anomaly. The ghost of a dead universe. Your power is a wild, untamed variable in a meticulously crafted equation. You cannot be allowed to exist. He raised his hands, and the air itself began to twist. Golden, intricate rings of the Mandarin arts, mandalas of pure energy, materialized around him. This wasn't a physical confrontation. This was something far worse. Peter, get them out! Izuku yelled, realizing this was a fight he had to take alone. This man's power wasn't something Peter could punch or web. Kid, no! Go! Izuku roared, unleashing a wave of one for all at 20%, not as an attack, but as a concussive blast to push Peter towards the console. I'll hold him off. Peter, seeing the resolve in Izuku's eyes, made a split-second decision. He slammed his hand down on the release button. Alarms blared to life. The red energy cells dissolved, and the imprisoned heroes began to stir, groggy and disoriented. So be it, Strange said, his expression one of mild disappointment. His fight was not with the freed prisoners. It was with the anomaly. The world dissolved around Izuku. He was no longer in the prison. He was standing in the ruins of UA High School. The sky was the color of nothing, the horrible, sterile white of the incursion. No! He whispered, his heart seizing in his chest. He saw them. Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki. Bakugo. They were standing before him, their faces disappointed. You failed us, Deku, Uraraka said, her voice hollow, her warm brown eyes now cold and accusing. You were supposed to save everyone. But you ran. You let us die, Bakugo snarled, his voice a venomous echo. You weren't strong enough. You were never strong enough. It was an illusion. He knew it was an illusion. But the pain, the guilt, it was real. It was a poison that seeped into his soul, weakening his resolve. This is your failure made manifest, Strange's voice echoed from all around him. The weight of 1 billion souls you could not save. How can you hope to save this world when you couldn't even save your own? The phantoms of his friends lunged at him. He cried out, stumbling back. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't bring himself to raise a hand against their faces. Ninth. It is not real. Nana Shimura's voice was a desperate cry from within the OFA network. It is a lie woven from your grief. Fight it. How? Izuku choked out, as phantom explosions from Bakugo's palms rocked the ground around him. Do not fight what you see, the second user's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Fight the weaver of the spell. Attack the sorcerer, not the illusion. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the heart-wrenching images. He focused, pushing past the guilt, past the pain. He reached out with danger sense, not for physical threats, but for the source of the magic. He felt it, a cold, calculating point of intelligence behind the illusion. Strange. He opened his eyes. The illusion was still there, but he looked through it. He saw the faint, shimmering outline of Strange, standing calmly amidst the chaos he had created. I see you! Izuku roared. He activated One for All, but he didn't charge. He began to move. He used Float to leap into the air, then fired Black Whip in a dozen different directions, latching onto the phantom ruins of the school. He began to swing, to move, to spin, creating a complex, three-dimensional web of motion. He combined it with FA Gene, building and releasing kinetic energy with every swing, making his trajectory utterly unpredictable. He was a green pinball of rage and grief, ricocheting through the illusionary world. Even Strange's magical senses struggled to keep up. The boy wasn't moving like a fighter. He was moving like a particle in a supercollider. Your tricks are impressive, Strange's voice echoed, a hint of strain now audible. But you are still just a child lashing out in the dark. The illusion shifted. Suddenly Izuku was falling. He landed in his childhood bedroom. His mother, Inko Midoriya, stood before him, tears in her eyes. Izuku? My baby, why did you leave me? I was so scared. His heart broke. This was the worst illusion of all. The one that preyed not on his failure as a hero, but on his failure as a son. Mom! He whispered, his momentum gone, his resolve crumbling. The illusionary Inko reached for him. Come here, my son. It's all right. Let it go. You don't have to fight anymore. He felt the magic trying to lull him, to pacify the raging storm of One for All. It was trying to unravel his power by soothing the will that commanded it. And then he felt another voice, a real one, from within. The voice of Nana Shimura, the grandmother who had been forced to leave her own child behind. She is not your mother, Izuku. She is a memory. A weapon. Your mother would not want you to give up. She would want you to fight. To live. For her, Nana's fierce, protective love cut through the spell like a blade. The illusion flickered. Izuku looked at his mother's face and saw the lie behind her eyes. His grief turned to a cold, hard fury. You don't get to use her against me, he snarled. He focused all his power, all his will, into a single point. He didn't need to see Strange anymore. He just needed to attack the spell itself. He drew his fist back. You want to see what happens when a child lashes out? He screamed, his voice raw with emotion. St. Louis smash. He didn't punch. He brought his leg around in a devastating, 45% roundhouse kick, aimed not at the illusion of his mother, but at the fabric of the spell itself. The kick tore a hole in reality. The illusion shattered like glass. Izuku found himself back in the prison, on his hands and knees, panting. The air around him shimmered with the remnants of broken magic. Across the platform, Sheriff Strange had a hand raised, a golden shield of energy in front of him, cracked and sputtering. For the first time, a flicker of surprise, of genuine shock, crossed the Sorcerer Supreme's face. The boy hadn't just endured the mindscape, he had broken out of it through sheer, indomitable will. Impossible, Strange whispered. Behind them, the sounds of battle raged. The freed heroes, led by a revitalized Captain Marvel who seemed to be drawing on some latent energy from the prison's core, were tearing through the automated defenses. Kid, we gotta go! Peter yelled, swinging by on a web line, pulling a groggy falcon with him. Chalice got a transport waiting. Izuku knew he couldn't beat Strange. The sorcerer was on a completely different level. But he had done what he needed to do. He had survived. He had bought the time they needed. He pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The mental battle had been more exhausting than any physical fight. He met Strange's gaze one last time. The sorcerer's expression was no longer calm or condescending. It was one of grudging respect and profound curiosity. This boy was more than just a power source. He was a force of will that could defy the laws of magic itself. Just as Izuku was about to leap away, Strange spoke, his voice no longer booming through the chamber, but projected directly into Izuku's mind. It was a conspiratorial whisper. God sees all. The phrase sent a jolt through Izuku. It was what Jane Foster had said. But even God has blind spots, Strange continued, his eyes conveying a message that his face did not. You shattered my illusion. You created a flaw in a perfect spell. A blind spot. Do it again. Create them. And then he raised his hands, and a massive wall of crimson energy bands erupted between them, blocking Izuku's path to his allies. It looked like an attack, a final attempt to stop them, but Izuku felt no malice from it. It was a performance. The heretics are escaping. Strange boomed for the benefit of any watching eyes. They will not get far. Izuku understood. Strange wasn't his enemy. He was a prisoner, just like everyone else, playing a long, dangerous game. He was a double agent in the court of God himself. The wall wasn't to stop Izuku. It was to give him cover, to make his escape look legitimate. Let's go! He yelled to Peter. He turned, and with a final, explosive burst of One for All, he smashed through a weakened section of the prison wall, leading the freed heroes out into the radioactive twilight of future imperfect. From the shattered control platform, Sheriff Strange watched them go. He lowered his hands, the crimson bands fading away. The trap had failed. The anomaly had escaped, and a seed of chaos had been successfully planted. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the sorcerer's lips. Let the games begin, he whispered to the silence. Far away, in the obsidian throne room of Castle Doom, God Emperor Doom sat upon his throne, observing the events in the ISO cube through a mystical scrying pool. He had watched the entire confrontation. He had seen the boy's impossible power, his unbreakable will. He had seen him shatter the mindscape of the Sorcerer Supreme. He was not angry. He was intrigued. For the first time since he had forged this world, an unknown variable had been introduced into his perfect equation. A peace that did not belong, a power that did not follow his rules. He leaned forward, his metal gauntlet clenching on the arm of his throne. The anomaly, Victor Von Doom mused, his voice a low, metallic rumble that echoed with absolute power. Show me more.